We're live now. How
All
are you?
right.
um, well, I will ask you about Josh Allen, so we'll just chat about that for 1 second. So, Amy, my friend, who's going to introduce herself in a second, is from Buffalo, and I'm a big Josh Allen fan. We're we are just a week past the catch, not a catch situation. How are you feeling?
Well, one of the things that I said I was gonna write about is that I'm a lifelong loser and I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm gotten used to it, but yesterday was tough. I mean, just to see like my husband's a Patriots fan, so I'm trying.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I mean, he's also a Bills fan, so I'm trying not to like actively root against them, but just to see like, oh sure, one year they suck, and the next year they're going to the Super Bowl, and all these years of Josh Allen, and we haven't been able to go over the hurdle. So yeah,
All
it
right.
kinda
Next year, as we
next
say
year,
always,
that's what I
next
was
year.
told. This is the best time of year to be a Bills fan because
Yeah.
everything is possible, and we're gonna win it all next year.
Perfect. I love it. All right. So, Amy, before I jump into why we're doing this, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Amy Comeau. I've spent my entire career in nonprofit, from the performing arts to higher education to healthcare, and now I'm on my own. I got my own consulting business doing marketing communications consulting, actually for the arts right now, and also another one of our Ripples authors. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm just been exploring writing and playing on Substack and trying to figure out kind of what I want to write next. Yeah.
Love
What
it.
you wanna
Okay.
do too, beyond consulting.
Yeah. So the reason we're doing this is because I think maybe I posted that I was working on a nonprofit leadership book,
Mhm.
and then you said, "Hey, I'm doing something similar. Let's catch up." And I said, "Great. Well, let's just record it and put
Yeah,
it out there." So that's why
here
we're
we
here.
are.
So we don't really know what each other is doing. I'm going to let you start. So what prompted you to reach out and say, "Let's chat about this"?
Well, I saw you're writing 2 books about nonprofit leadership, and because I have my entire career has been in nonprofit from, like, literally, like, really small, like, 5 to 10 person shops to $6 billion organization like Emory. I'm really curious as to kind of what you're writing about, if you need help with collaborators or that kind of stuff. And because I think there's a lot from my entire career of what I've observed, around nonprofit leadership and what makes it great, but then also where, um, because they're nonprofits, sometimes they can't always afford the talent that's needed, and so how do you figure out how to, especially now as I'm in my consulting career, how can I figure out now that I've kinda gotten to a different level in my own career, it may not be going back in as a full-time employee, as a VP of marketing or something, but how can I provide my now 30 years of expertise to nonprofits at a value that they can afford, but that also will help them thrive and grow. So
Mm,
that's why I'm interested in it.
love it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the reason so I've had the opportunity to write some books for leaders generically.
Mhm.
And some of that's been around how do you embrace the entrepreneurial mindset, some of it's around leading with purpose. And I've also had the chance to be involved with lots of boards. I've never, well, that's not true. I started a couple nonprofits, so I did work in a nonprofit, but not an established one. And it just occurs to me that it takes some different skills
Mhm.
to run a nonprofit effectively, and I also think there are some skills that should be universal, but that are sometimes hard for nonprofit leaders to embrace.
Mhm.
And so we've had a chance so far. I say we, one of my good friends and business partners, Raj Chowdhury, and I are working on this nonprofit leadership book. And we've interviewed, I don't know, 5 or 6 folks so far. We're just starting, and I think one of the interesting things is there is definitely dialogue around. Well, is it different or is it not different to
Mhm.
run a for-profit versus a nonprofit? I'd love your initial thoughts on that.
I think it's both and I really do. So, like, when I went to business school, I was so excited to, like, actually, learn business school stuff, and I said, "Oh, are we gonna talk about running nonprofit businesses?" And the professors looked at me like I had a third eye. Because there is a nuance, right? Like, it's EBITDA, not EBITDA, and just different things. Like, you're reinvest yes, you have to make a profit, right? They say no margin, no mission.
Mm,
But it's different, but at the same time, the basic principles of leadership and finances and all of those things are very similar. You still have to It's all still very good, but it's a different mindset. And I think some of the challenges that happen, particularly with smaller nonprofits, is especially if they are not even small, but if they're founder led, right? There gets to be a point, and I imagine this happens too with entrepreneurs. I've studied a little bit with entrepreneurs. I'm not as familiar in that space, but there gets to be a time when the organization becomes larger than the founder's um, ability to keep it going, and so they hit what's called founder syndrome, right? And so
Yeah.
you hit this crossroads where you want to hold on to the value of the intent of what the founder's vision was,
Yeah.
but you have to start to break ties with some of those roots. Otherwise, you're not going to grow and have the impact that you want to have. And I think that's a really hard um, process for organizations to go through, especially if the founder's still involved.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even more so than that definitely happens in like startups and
Yeah, I imagine.
entrepreneurial journeys, but in nonprofits, I got to imagine it's even harder for that founder to extract because they did it because they were trying to change the world.
Right.
Like it's a little different when you're, starting a SaaS software company and you're like, yeah, I'm trying to make $1 billion. But when you're like, I'm trying to end homelessness in this city, and then maybe you're bored or maybe the writing's on the wall is like, hey, maybe you're not able to run this anymore. That's got to
Right.
be even harder.
Right. Right. It's not like you're not gonna get a buyout, right? You're not gonna like
Yeah.
sell it to
Yeah.
like some, Amazon or somebody.
Right. I guess that at that point you got to go get another job,
Yeah.
which
And I
might,
think that's the other difference with nonprofits too, is that you don't have the luxury of the financial, stability even as an individual, right? So I mean, I know that I have been underpaid my entire career, even, because of working a nonprofit. And so therefore I don't have, the big, stock options and all the things that a lot of people who worked in for profit have. So that means that I've got to keep finding my next gig, as opposed to making all your money in for profit and then be able to sit on that, financial
Mhm.
foundation, and then have the freedom to um, explore and experiment in the sort of nonprofit and board space.
Yeah. Well, so you bring up board. I think that's another interesting aspect of nonprofits, right? Like most for-profits do have a board, but I
Mhm.
think nonprofit leaders, I find that to be, I'm board chair of two organizations right now, and it's hard activating a board, and it's hard putting together the board you need at that point in time,
Mhm.
and then evolving it as you get, like so. Maybe talk for a minute about how you see that, how the importance of that as a skill for the nonprofit leaders, like board recruitment, board management.
I think, again, I've not been in the position to actually recruit boards. I've worked with a lot of them, and I, in hindsight, have not valued the board members' depth of expertise as much as I did because I was so much younger in my career.
Mm,
I think there's value. Like when you put together that board, you got to think, my personal opinion, what's the value those individuals bring to you? Is it purely financial and you just want them to make a
yeah.
donation and recruit other donors? Then that's fine. That's one way. But if they're coming and they bring like excellent business acumen or marketing expertise or what have you, they're going to bring that expertise to, and they're going to be looking at how you're running the organization through that lens.
Hmm.
And so like I was having a conversation with somebody saying, I don't know why my board keeps asking for XYZ. And I'm like, well, that's because they worked for, XYZ
Yeah.
Fortune 500 company. And so they're used to seeing stuff presented to them this way. And so if you're working in a nonprofit and you're in your 20s, you don't know that, you need to be presenting ROI and things like that in a way to your board. So I think that's, when you're crafting a board and you got to figure out, you have to be very clear on what your own vision is for what you want them, how you want to support them so that you can then engage them properly and set expectations correctly.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's a very difficult thing for the nonprofit leader to do because I think this is why I think the board chair is such an important
Mhm.
position. And I'm going to make part of my book for chair direction as well,
Mhm.
because a really good board chair, and I'm not claiming to be a really good board chair. I mean, I struggle with how to activate existing board members. So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, so I think a really good board chair can do that. But like the nonprofit leader feels like, well, they're volunteering their time, they're donating to this. How hard can I push them?
Mhm.
But if you think about like the skill sets needed to be a nonprofit leader, you obviously have to have this altruistic like belief in changing the world. So you have to be that kind of person.
Yep.
You have to be able to manage people, which any leader has to do, but that's not easy. You have to. Another thing we're learning is you have to really be a great storyteller,
Mhm.
because you're not able to just crank up a sales team and go out and get people to subscribe to your monthly service the way a tech company can. You've got to tell the story not only to potential donors and sponsors and individual givers, but also to your team, who, to your point, aren't making an absolute ton of money. So they have to, their heart has to be called. So you have to do all those things. You have to manage a board.
Mhm.
You have to know how to scale an organization, and then you have to know how to deliver whatever services you're delivering, which often involves government interaction, which often involves foundation compliance. Like,
Yeah.
it's a really, really hard job for people who, in most cases, I think, start not thinking, I'm going to take on one of the most complex leadership management jobs there is. They're thinking, gosh, I really want to do something good with my life.
Right.
And then they
Right.
find themselves in that position.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally. I was fortunate when I went to business school. It's when I was already working at Emory, so I was able to get some of the benefit of some tuition. I don't know, credit, so to speak. And so I was happy, but when I was working at the opera, I knew there was no way I could afford getting my MBA. I was just making sure that I
Yeah.
could afford all my, regular living expenses. And I always thought that MBA programs, and maybe some of them do, should have either a sponsorship or some sort of like opportunity for nonprofit leaders to be able to get, especially if they come in with the intent of being a nonprofit leader. You see people that come out of corporate and run nonprofits, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't
Yes. Right.
come with their MBAs. But I think for somebody who's always been dedicated, like I entered arts administration straight out of college. And so I think there's an opportunity there that, universities could provide that business acumen to the organizations that would benefit I, as much from it as for profits already do.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. One of the things that we're sort of seeing is that it, it's interesting as an organization grows, a nonprofit grows. The the need to reinforce and keep reminding and communicating the purpose, the
Mhm.
mission, it
Mhm.
grows. And I've seen this happen where I think that the nonprofit leaders sometimes loses sight of that because they think, well, everybody knows what we're doing and everybody started here for that reason, but actually becomes more important over time that you continue to story tell that. And yeah, and you being in the marketing world, like, I gotta think storytelling's, a big part of what you do when you help nonprofits.
I think so. I mean, it's so important to use, as you mentioned, to your external audiences, right? As to why they should, if it's a performing arts nonprofit, or why they should come to why they should come, why should they donate, why should they be engaged? That uh, the internal audiences, especially if you have turnover, it's important for them to understand your history.
Mhm, mhm. Yep. I think, being a master storyteller, the best nonprofits that I've seen, have you read the book Thirst, by the way?
No, I have not.
Yeah, Thirst is a great book, and it's got a lot of nonprofit storytelling involved in it, but I just think that's gotta be, the best nonprofit leaders are great, storytellers tellers as well. Yeah. So, um, I was curious, do you have anything that, you want to share or bring up that you're working on?
Well, right now I'm working on doing so obviously with Ripples, I published my book in 2024 about leadership memoir and leading my team through the pandemic. So it's a lot of leadership lessons on working in nonprofits and what that looks like. And so now I'm starting to one of the books I've always wanted to write and I haven't written it yet, and so trying to figure out how to do it is one on my entire career called On Divas and Doctors. So I worked in for 10 years with opera companies and then in 20 years in healthcare. So trying to figure out what
That
that would look
that sounds amazing.
like.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Okay, so are you working on that right now?
No, I keep thinking it. Well, I've been doing a lot of writing. Like I start writing things just to publish on Substack and things like that. So that's
Yeah,
what I've been thinking about. And so I'm not working on that per se. I keep thinking about it. Like I want to, like I don't, what would it, what would it look? Let me put it this way: I'm working on it in my brain a lot more than I
sure.
have
Yeah,
like
yeah.
ever. So I'm like trying to like, figure out what would a construct look like for that. Um, so yeah, and now, I mean, to your point, what I'm doing now is I'm supporting nonprofits a lot with my consulting business, marketing, and communication strategy. So if anybody's listening and would benefit from some of that expertise, I'd be happy to help them out.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Well, going back to your book idea, like I love the idea when anyone talks about, wanting to write a book and maybe just being early in the process,
Mhm.
my recommendation is just that. It's like just get stuff out, write, put it out, Substack obviously I love. So like, just writing, think of what a chapter could be, write a little bit of that, put it out there, get some
Mhm.
feedback, keep doing it. So some great books have been written in that manner. So it's a great way to sort of tease that out. Yeah.
It's funny, that's kinda how I did my first book, is I would write, these Friday emails to my team, and then
Yes,
if
of
I thought
course.
it right, and I thought, "Oh, if this is a good one," I would publish it as an article on LinkedIn and just see what would happen, and I would do a few of those, and then, like, somebody I didn't know say, "Oh, are you thinking about putting these together in a book?" I'm like, "Okay, alright." It's
Yeah.
yes. So, that's why I gotta start figuring that's when I start playing around in Substack with some of these other themes that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I've enjoyed seeing your stuff there. My last question for you then, on this sort of nonprofit leadership
Mhm,
direction, which is not something that I knew was an issue, a challenge for nonprofits, which is in the for-profit world, there are very clear, finish lines, goals you're trying to hit. ROI makes sense. You
mhm,
know exactly what ROI is. Maybe for your organization, it's getting to a certain share price. Maybe it's a certain EBITDA, as you mentioned. I think for nonprofits to have a benchmark or to have measurements for their organization's success
mhm,
can be very difficult because there's not like a defined like Central Outreach and Advocacy Center is one of my favorite nonprofits in Atlanta, and they're working to end homelessness by mostly providing IDs to people who lose them. So as they as they think about that each year, like how do they measure their success? How do they measure whether they did a good job that year? How do they make sure their board feels that way? Not like,
right,
oh, we have $500,000 budget, we want to get to the
yeah,
600,000. Well, that's not exciting or motivating, but like what so I just like, do you have thoughts on that
yeah.
aspect of the job?
Yeah, well, so I have a performing arts background, right? So I think of things in terms of ticket sales. So for performing arts organizations that are nonprofit, they know what they want to do. They got
Sure.
they're trying to sell out their seats, their shows. They're trying to sell out their season. They're looking at season ticket renewals, new season subscribers, those types of things. So it's very easy. But when I transitioned from that into the healthcare space, I realized there's no season in healthcare, right?
Mm,
Other than your fiscal year. I mean, there's seasonality to when people get sick and all, flu and all that kind of stuff. And so it was there that I mean, not that I didn't know this, but learning about really creating SMART goals. And so I think for organizations that don't have like a season to sell and working with their board saying, okay, this is what measure your baseline. This is what success looks like in FY27 or FY26. And here's and define those goals, your SMART goals ahead of time and make sure your board signs off on them so that you can then look back on them a year later and say whether you met them or not. Otherwise, you're just going to be saying you're going to put sort of nondescript goals out there and then you're going to find a way to prove that you met them even though you're
yeah,
not.
that's right.
You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
And so I think that's what you have to do. And you might have like, the big, what is it, the BHAG, the big hairy audacious goal of like ending hunger, which, no one's ever going to be able to do 100%. And so, well, what does that look like for,
Yeah. Yep.
an organization? Does that mean you're going to reduce in X neighborhood the amount of, people with, on free lunches from, 100 to 90 or something like that. I mean, just trying to figure out what are those measures you're gonna be looking at that you can strive towards to show that you're making a difference.
Yeah, but like, and that I'm glad you mentioned that example because that's an example of like, yes, if you can reduce the amount of people that need free meals, from 100 to 90, that sounds good, but it also could be for not great reasons.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you just
Right.
maybe shift them to another community, and that's their
Exactly.
problem. Or, you suddenly they're not on the list. So it's like, yeah, whereas like EBITDA is EBITDA,
Yeah,
top line revenue is top line revenue.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think you also mentioned something that's like Warren Buffett is one of my business heroes, and I've modeled my company Purpose Group off of a lot of what he's done in his career. One of the things he talks about is not shooting the arrow of success at the wall and then painting the bullseye around it. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, you gotta know what you're focused on, and to your point, your board has to really be on board with that, but I do think that could be a struggle for, lots of nonprofit leaders, and which, again, is not so much a struggle for their for-profit counterparts.
Right. Well, and then because then they tend to boil the ocean. I mean, because I
Yep,
think there's so much that you wanna accomplish and so many things you can do, but again, nonprofits are typically under-resourced because of, their situations. So you have to be really, I think, focused on what you're trying to achieve, and so that's why having very clear goals around what you're going to accomplish matters, because then you can push away the noise, and some of that noise might be coming from your board too. They might say, "We should really be doing this." Like, and then that's when the storytelling comes back, like, "Yeah, that's great, but let's not forget that our core goal is, XYZ,
yeah,
not ABC."
yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate this so much. This was awesome. Yeah, I'm so
Yes,
glad
yeah,
you pinged me and said, "Hey," and that's part of the reason why I kind of threw that into that one post, like, working on a book on these 2 topics. The other one is purpose-driven leadership at large corporations.
yeah,
So that's a whole different talk, but, like, this one's very near and dear to me because to me, like, gosh, if you could help any type of leader, it would be the nonprofit leader.
yeah,
Gosh, we want them to have the most success, and yet I think they get the least amount of attention,
yeah.
and the least amount of support, so
I think it would be interesting, with your 2 books, it would almost be interesting to, like, I think corporate leaders have a lot to learn from nonprofit leaders, and nonprofit leaders have a lot to learn from corporate leaders.
yeah, that's
'Cause
a
there's
great
a
point, yeah.
compassion in nonprofit that
Yeah,
doesn't always
mhm,
translate.
yeah, mhm.
And so how do you find the best of both worlds?
Well, and that's so you hit on exactly sort of my thesis for, business as a force for good. So just
Mhm,
generally, I'm enamored with this idea that business should be a force for good, and I feel like I always like a very simple Venn diagram. And so on one circle, you have all the great things that businesses know how to do,
mhm,
and then on the other circle, you have all the great things that nonprofits and
mhm.
do good causes have, and then the overlap in there is where I want these things to meet. So
Yeah,
yes, nonprofits have purpose built in, right? And
yeah,
and all these great things, and they want to improve their community and take care of their team and all that. And then for profits, they know how to grow and charge and momentum and all these things. Organizational,
yep,
if those two could learn from each other, I think
mhm.
that's gosh, that would be unbelievable.
It would be cool.
All right, Amy, stay out of the very scary ice. I'm
Ooh,
putting that in quotes because we're in Atlanta recording this on our ice day, which turned out to be not very
no,
very
not
exciting.
yet.
Thankfully, thankfully, it's
Yes.
not very exciting. But thanks for chatting. It was so good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much. It was fun.
I'll see you at the next Ripples Media event, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
All right, bye.
Bye.